Welcome to the answer, and that is Mazda MX-5. That's right, Miata. Now we've driven the RF version of this car before, but today we have the soft top, and I'm going to talk about the differences in their exteriors. And that really comes down to when the top is down on this car, you have a flat trunk lid deck panel, and you have no fastback design that comes to the behind your head. So when the top is down on this, when you drive it, you feel open and exposed more so than you do on the hard top. Now the trade-off is some NVH on the highway, and we'll talk about that in the driving portion. But really the looks of this, well, this one's blue instead of red that we had last year. And it says a gray soft top, looks really good actually. The paint on this is just like Mazda's other paint colors. They just, when the sun hits it, any pearl metallic pops out incredibly. Mazda can't be making money on the paint jobs. They've got to be doing some of the best work in the body shop right now. All that covered, let's get to the interior so we can get into all the nuts and bolts after that.
Welcome to the interior portion of the MX-5 Miata. First off, I have Brian's wallet right here. I just wanted to point that out. And this car's ethos is simplicity and driver focused. And that's what you get in the interior. Everything's driver focused, driver centric, and simple. The relation of the shifter and the wheel and all the inputs you need are right where they need to be. You just get in this car and you want to drive. You come up with excuses to find a twisty road and engage in all those things you get to touch. From the shifter to the clutch pedal to everything. Let's get on to some of the other things. There's not a whole lot of creature comforts in here, but there are some. With this trim, the Grand Touring, you do get auto climate control and it works seamlessly. You do get heated seats, which is nice when the top's down on a cool day like this. The infotainment might be a little lackluster, but it does have wireless CarPlay and it works brilliantly. In fact, maybe better than any other cars we've been in of late. And then lastly, like you get in all Mazdas, you get this dial down in the middle to navigate through the infotainment. And kind of along the lines of the shifter and the wheel, it's in the right spot. You don't have to take your eyes off the road too much to do it. The whole Mazda rider and horse thing are one. It continues in this, and it's in the interior as well. With that, let's get it into the shop and let's break it down. What makes it so fun out on the road?
Welcome to the nuts and bolts portion of the ND2 Miata, and I want to start with this nut right here. This happens to be the smallest and lightest and shortest lug nut we've ever had on a vehicle in this show. Something else that we like to talk about are the wheel and tire package, and that speaks to the engineer's intent of the vehicle. This runs on a very lightweight 17-inch wheel with 205/45/17 Bridgestone Potenza 5001s. Tread design is that of really an all-season performance tire. It also has a low tread wear rating, which tells you grip is a priority. Tread wear of 280. These are definitely going to be okay because it's so light, but if this was on something like a Mustang, it'd be gone in 3 months. So, with that out of the way, I want to compare this directly to the NA Miata on size and dimension. This ND is lighter than the NA Miata, and the way they pull it off is it's 1.3 inches shorter nose to tail, but it's 2.5 inches wider in track width, and the wheelbase is 1.7 inches longer. And making it wider and making the wheelbase longer adds stability and reliability, more predictive handling for the driver. And I've noticed that driving this. The NA is a little bit snappier on a back foot, whereas this is a lot more linear in how it lets go. So let's talk about the nuts and bolts up front. We have a pretty straightforward design up here. We've got a decent 4-lug hub with a hub-centric center, single pot brake caliper, and I want to talk about the design of the suspension. It's an A-arm upper and an L-arm lower, which is exactly that of the NA Miata. Really cool to have that here. What is different is that everything's aluminum, and that reduces unsprung weight, and that's really where they found a lot of weight loss on this car. It's not very often you see a new car come out that's lighter than its predecessor. It's really, really impressive. Something else you see here, it is a true upper A-arm with a coilover shock in the middle. It says a Bilstein shock because we have the performance package on this one with the aluminum slip diff. But you'll notice that unlike things like a 350Z or even a Honda Accord, you'll see a funky knuckle design where the ball joint is above the actual tire. This doesn't have that. This has a lot more leverage on it because of this design, but because the car is so light, they can do that. Something that adds is it keeps the ball joint within the barrel of the wheel itself when the wheel is mounted. And what that does is it keeps the A-arm mounting point low as well, which keeps center of gravity low, which keeps this fender low. It's all intended to be that way. You look at a 50Z, you look at this, and you'll notice the nose of this thing is a lot lower. One last thing I want to talk about that's special to this, it's a front steer design, which means the rack and pinion is in the front of the axle. It's also mounted on the center point of the hub, so it's not below the hub, it's not above, and that's how you get the good steering feel. That gives you better reactive steering and gives you more communicative steering. Really happy with that. So, on the rear, it also has that same aluminum knuckle, multi-link design. It is different than the NC Miata, but not anything crazy back there. There's traditional link back there, independent rear. The one thing that is unique to Miata I really want to hit on is the power plant frame, which is short for PPT. Basically, in the American muscle car world, that would be called a torque tube on a solid axle car. This is not a solid axle car. You don't usually see that. What that is basically a C-channel mounted to the front of the diff housing, and then it mounts straight to the transmission case. And what that does is makes them one together. That's how you have crisp shifts. That's how you get quick off the line without wheel hop and without any axle windup or binding. If you've driven an independent rear suspension car with more than about 200 pounds of torque, you've felt that before. This is something that I wish other cars would do. It works really well here, and it's part of the sweet spot.
Ron did a great job with suspension, and normally there's not a whole lot to talk about under the hood of a Miata because, let's face it, everybody always asks for more power. Well, that's not necessarily the case here anymore. This is not just the ND, this is the ND2 Miata, featuring a 2-liter dual hood cam, 16-valve, direct injection, 4-cylinder. Before we get buried too much into some of the specs and a little bit of the backstory on the motor, I want to point something specific out right here. And that is the intake it's got a little hose that comes off the top of it before it goes into the throttle body, and it feeds into the interior. That's how you do cabin noise on the inside. You don't fake it with speakers. You just pipe some of it into the cabin so you can hear it. Good job, Mazda. So originally, the ND was only going to get the 1.5. Then 2-liter was an afterthought. And you can kind of tell in the ND1. A little underpowered. It only made 155 horsepower. And then they finally got time in 2019 to give the 2-liter the treatment it deserved. And that's what we got. That bumped us up to 181 horsepower. It increased that red line from 6,800 to 7,500 RPM. That's right, 7,500 RPM. As the chief engineer here in North America, David Coleman, says, they basically did the old school hot rodding tricks. There's no boost on here, so you can't just dial it up. They had to actually do some actual mechanical changes to this thing. And it's not as simple as just putting on a bigger throttle body or bigger exhaust. There's more to it than just that. So don't think if you got an ND1, you can just make it an ND2. Basically what they did is more air, more better is what that means. So they increased the throttle body by 28%. It's the exact same throttle body off the 2.5-liter motor that they have in other Mazdas. The intake manifold, bigger. The exhaust ports, bigger. They got a more aggressive exhaust cam. The piston itself, David Coleman, he calls it a work of art. They lightened it by 27 grams. The connecting rods, they lightened it by 41 grams. The ND1 has a single mass flywheel made into that beautiful 6-speed manual transmission. And the transmission doesn't change, but this one gets a dual mass flywheel, which helps with smoothness but normally makes it heavier and doesn't spin as freely, but they made it lightweight. They specifically engineered it to make it rev freely. And a host of more upgrades as well that we're not going to get into and we don't have time for. Bottom line is, that's enough talk. Let's see how it drives. Enough talk about what makes this thing go. Let's see what it actually does on the road.
Deal. Hey, can you hold this for me real quick?
Oh, yeah, sorry. You get a little room there.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you actually move the pedal now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, all right, hit it!
It's 60.
So, is it fast?
Yes. No, it's quick.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not fast, it's quick.
Okay.
Look, we had the RF last year, and I'm going to pre-apologize for any audio to our viewers. Let me get my man bun up here. The top is down because I can't fit with it up.
Right.
Just get that out of the way.
Yeah.
And that's part of dynamics to me.
Okay.
But if I take the shoes off and I slouch just a little bit, I can see pretty good out the windshield.
Okay.
That's really good. Now, back to fast or slow. Is it fast? No. Is it slow? No. It's quick.
It's more than adequate.
totally more than adequate.
Okay.
But I do want to say it feels slower than the RF we had last year, just a little bit.
And we're not sure why.
Not sure why.
It should be the same. In theory, this should be quicker.
Because it's 100 pounds lighter.
100 pounds lighter, right.
I do feel like it's driving as if it has low octane fuel in it. It doesn't feel like it's particularly down on power, but it doesn't feel like the ringer that last year's was. Okay, so all that out of the way, it's not slow. On the top end, it doesn't feel quite as strong.
Okay.
Now, what really matters on the ride and drive of this is the dynamics of the vehicle, and this is the same as the RF.
Yes.
The relationship between the steering wheel, and you hit on this on the interior, and the shifter and the actual parking brake are so perfect that I don't think there's another brand of vehicle on sale today that is as on-point dialed as this is. And that's part of the magic of this car.
Right.
You can call it a hairdresser's car you want. This is a driver's car. That's what it really is.
So dynamics of intended purpose, which is we always like to get into, that's exactly what this is. This is a driver's car.
Yes.
And it hits those check marks?
Nails them.
Nails them.
Absolutely nails them. This one has a limited slip diff.
Yep.
And it has the 6-speed manual, which is exactly how you get this car.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because some don't have that. The Sport doesn't have it. The Club does. Some of the Grand Tourings don't.
Right, this one does.
Yeah.
And so that's spec'd properly. I'm glad they did that. And it really comes alive on twisties.
Oh, yeah.
And it revs all the way to 75.
Yes.
Which is way better than the ND1 did, which we've gotten into that in the previous review of this car last year. But the things that matter to a driver, gauges are clear, turn-in is good, but it's not a burnout machine. That's what most important.
So let's talk about, because we had the RF last year. This is the soft top or roadster, whatever they call this. How do you, driving-wise, your driving experience with the roadster versus the RF, what are some of the differences between the two?
Right off, something I noticed is there feels like there's less weight, although it doesn't feel like the other car's a pig.
Sure.
But I feel like there's less weight balance in the rear. Biggest thing to me is I can tell there's not a clamshell behind me.
Right.
Whereas in the RF, it kind of felt more like a Targa than a Roadster.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The RF was definitely had more of that Targa feel. This is definitely more just straight up convertible. You get full open air experience, which is kind of cool. And you and I both love the. You literally just fold it up and fold it down. I mean, it's just that quick.
It's that easy. Yeah.
I will say though, the RF is quieter. Like if you're trying to make a phone call and you're on the highway going 70 plus miles an hour.
When you call me driving this, I can't really hear you.
It's not enjoyable making phone calls on the interstate at speed.
Right.
In this versus it was the RF, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that's the difference between a soft top and hard top.
Top, yeah.
So, okay, Brian, Hipster Score.
All right.
3, 2, 1, 6.
What?
But it should be a 7.
Wait, where are you getting 7 from?
Well, I feel like the Miata at one point in its time was a 7.
I think the NA is still an 8.
The NA is probably, even
because
higher.
of the pop-up headlights.
But and that's exactly where I was heading. What's happening, two things happening. It lost pop-up headlights years ago. If it had pop-up headlights, it'd at least be a 7.
Right.
And I also think the Miata's hipsters like they like the nostalgia, they like the legacy of cars.
Right.
But they also still want it new in a weird way. So Miata's been out for a long time, and like it doesn't excite hipsters as much as it once did. Even though it should, so that's why I'm saying it should get a 7, but it gets a 6.
I think if it had plaid seats, it would get a 7.
It'd be right back in the 7 territory. Absolutely.
Right.
All right, Brian, we've had a lot of fun driving this around, talking about all the nuts and bolts of it. So we love the platform, but who's this car for?
I'm going to refrain from saying hairdresser because that's what people want us to say. But the reality is this is for two people. It's for hipsters and track rats.
Oh.
And I'm going there because if you track cars at all, if you spend any time at a racetrack, you're going to find a million of these. We've got spec racers, and as we've shown, it's a really good chassis to build on. It's supported by the aftermarket, and with the ND2, you don't have to rush out and get a supercharger or a turbocharger. It's fast enough to be satisfying. As far as hipsters go, not everyone wants a roadster.
Right.
And that's why I'm saying hipster. I mean, what I really mean by that is there's a roadster owner and buyer that they're going to love this.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about competition while driving this. The BRZ, FRS, 86, twins, triplets, that's the closest competitor, I think. Although I think they compete better with the RF, but platform to platform, they're the same. Sure. The Boxster comes to mind, but the price point, they're just so far off, it's not fair to call them competition. It's just not even remotely close. So that's,
in fact, to me, that's almost really high praise for this is what that is.
Well, in terms of driving enjoyment, they're in the same neighborhood. Yeah. And that's what's crazy. That's a really good point. Yeah. For the money, this is more than half the price of a 718, and it's going to be almost Look, it's almost the same joy.
Yeah.
Put it that way. They're a little bit different, but they're almost the same joy.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's my take on it. What about you?
Well, so yeah, my final take is I think what Mazda has done with the Miata from the get-go since 1989, they have pulled off, and they continue to do it every time they make a new one. They've pulled off the Jeep trick did with Land Rover.
Oh,
so
man.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Thank you, Britain, for the awesome luxury SUV that can go anywhere, and the awesome Roadster in Lotus Elan and MGB. But thank you, Japan, and America,
Jeep, right,
for bringing us the Jeep SUV, and in this, a reliable Roadster that we can all drive. And I would sum it up with, this is the approachable Roadster track sports car.
Yep.
For anyone that's maybe new to it, or just doesn't have the money to get anything else. This is approachable.
If you are new to driving manual, get this car. It's very forgiving. If you're new to track duty, get this car. It will make you a better driver. If you're new to Roadsters, don't get the MGB. This is every man's MG. And with that, I think we got us an episode. Thanks for watching. Check us out on BrakeCheckShow.com. Did I miss anything?
I think that's it. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, that'll work. Thanks for listening. See you next time.